Thanks everybody for joining us for this Innovations and Conversations with Stephen Anderson. My name is Stephen Anderson. I want to thank Promethean and ClassFlow for sponsoring us. You can check out ClassFlow at classflow.com. Really cool, innovative product for you to use with in your one-to-one or your BYD classroom. Really saves you a lot of time, brings everything together. Really cool. Be sure to check that out. So today we're up for episode 3, and not like the Star Wars Episode 3, which I really wasn't a fan of. This Episode 3 is going to be really, really awesome because it's with my good friend Tom Whitby. You might know Tom Whitby from Twitter. He is at Tom Whitby, or as I like to call him, the mustachioed Hawaiian shirt guy. But Tom's a dear friend of mine. We've done lots and lots of projects together, and so it's a really honor to have Tom on with us. So tell everybody hello, Tom.
Hello.
So today we're going to have just a conversation about some things that Tom's doing, some things that we've done together, but mostly we're going to talk about our book. So there's our book, The Relevant Educator: How Connectedness Empowers Learning, and those are our names down there. You can buy that. That's for sale right now at Corwin.com. You can check that out, but we'll talk a little more about that in a minute. So Tom, why don't you start off by telling everybody kind of your background in education? I know it's extensive, and I think people would. I mean, we were just sitting on here talking just a few minutes ago, and I learned something totally new about you and Woodstock, which we won't have to tell people the story, but tell everybody a little bit about your education background.
Actually, our story about Woodstock started with I went to the Steely Dan.
Steely Dan, yeah.
And most of the people there in the audience were on Medicare, so it was definitely an interesting concert. Oh yeah, in education. When did I start? Well, I spent 34 years in the classroom as a secondary English teacher. I taught every grade from 6 through 12 in that area, and I also taught a number of summer school programs working with the younger kids, the elementary level from about fourth, fifth, and sixth grade in that area. So I've pretty much run the gamut in education. I also taught adult ed courses for quite a while too. And then after I retired from public education, I went into higher education as an adjunct professor in the education department for about 6 years. So I guess it's 40 years in the classroom. That's what I've spent.
Well, your depth of knowledge that you have with education is really extensive, and that's kind of really what, when I started following you, that's what that's the reason that I started following you, 6 years ago, was the questions that you like to ask on Twitter or through social media was really pushing people to think differently, and that's how you and I came to know each other.
Right.
Was through EdChat. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about the history of EdChat?
Well, actually, we were back tweeting to each other before there were a lot of people who were even tweeting. Going back 6 years. A lot of the people who are many of the thought leaders in education today, especially in the area of social media and being connected educators, were on Twitter back then. They were leading the way, as it were. You and I guess I got together about 6 years ago, and one of the things that I did was provoke discussions with questions.
I call you the instigator. Whenever I tell the story, I call you you like to instigate people.
That's a thrill. So what I would do would be pose questions on Twitter, and people would engage in the conversation. But what was not happening was other people were not involving themselves. I mean, if you were on Twitter at the time, you could engage in the discussion, which was really good, but there weren't enough people for me. I really wanted to involve more people. If you were there, you saw it. If you weren't there, you didn't see anything. So to make it more real, I had contacted Shelley Terrell, who you and I were both in contact with, and Shelley was in Germany. You were in North Carolina, and I was in New York. And I came up with the idea to have an EdChat, or back then it wasn't named. I said, let's have a discussion, and we'll pick a time when we can tell people what we're going to talk about, and this way we can get more people involved with it, and everybody will know what we're doing. and Shelley thought that was a great idea. She came up with the idea of the EdChat hashtag, and then you came up with the idea of coming up with a poll so we could come up with a number of topics and get people to discuss, choose what they wanted to discuss, and that was 6 years ago. And what was funny was when we first did it, I picked the time 7 o'clock at night because that was most convenient for me. And it was very successful the first time we did it, the second time we did it, and then by the third time we'd gotten a number of requests to change the time. And the very reason people wanted to change the time was all of these educators who were in Europe and in Asia at the time were staying up till all hours or getting up early to participate in the EdChat. So we told them we couldn't change the time, but what we did was we added an EdChat. So we did it at 12 o'clock noon, and then a completely different topic at 7 o'clock. So that kind of accommodated everybody. The 12 o'clock noon chat became more of the international education chat, and the 7 o'clock one was more North America. But we've been doing 2 chats now for 6 years. The only time we take off is the week of Christmas and the week of New Year's.
And I'd have to go through and count the archive exactly, but it's over. It's been over at least 350. I mean, it's been, and again, the depth of stuff that we talk about. I mean, when we started, there wasn't really anything. There wasn't any. There were a few chats here and there, but there really wasn't anything to the extent at which we were doing it. There was a lot of haphazard stuff, and I think what we did was kind of made it work for people. We had a set time. We did it every week. We had the polls. We had that kind of format, and it's worked pretty well. And the kind of cool thing is now you can't go a day without seeing somebody doing some chat somewhere. And now there's a chat in almost every single state, and there's a chat for almost every subject area and grade level, and there's chats that start all the time. And so it's to know that you are in on the ground floor of that is pretty it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's not. As a matter of fact, it's not just America. I mean, there's India chat. There's oh God, I can't even tell you how many foreign chats there are. Countries have taken it up, and everybody's doing it. And I think it was our consistency that did it. The other thing that came about, we started this before people even knew what hashtags were. We used the whole idea of the hashtag in order to get people to follow the chat synchronously. And in doing that, what we did was we established a hashtag that is now placed on anybody's educational tweet if they want to extend the range. So if they've got 100 people following them when they put out a tweet, it just goes to those 100 people. But if they put the EdChat hashtag on, it goes to thousands of educators who actually follow that EdChat hashtag. So we're part of Twitter history in that we were the founders of that particular genre.
And that's allowed us to do some cool things too. Like we sat on a stage in Los Angeles and at these 140 conferences with Jeff Pulver, which people probably don't recognize the name Jeff Pulver, but they know the service that he created called Vonage. Most people know that Vonage is he's considered the father of voice over IP, and so he saw the need the social media was having a true impact on people's lives, and so we got invited out to talk there. We talked on the historic stage of the 92nd Street Y in New York City about hashtags. I mean, EdChat's has had far-reaching effects, and it's just really cool that we've been a little part of that. So using that as the basis, let's talk about the book. So this episode is dedicated to shameless promotion because that's what it is. Because I would have had you on anyway had I not even co-authored the book with you, because the book is great. But so let's talk about the book. And so those who didn't see, The Relevant Educator. It's part of Corwin's Connected Educator series, and I really look at it as the cornerstone of the entire series. Now, the other authors in the series are phenomenal. It's a huge, huge lineup of some of the heavy hitters in the education space, but the Corwin Connected Educator series is a set of books that really is for every educator out there. And so what I think ours is really kind of the cornerstone. It's the one that everybody needs to read about being connected. So if you had to, you have to give the elevator pitch to somebody as to what the relevant educator is about. What's it about?
Well, when it comes to collaboration, sometimes you say this so often, you think you're repeating yourself and everybody's heard it. But if there's anybody out there in our audience who hasn't heard me say this, I'll say it again. Collaboration has been with education right from the beginning. It's always been part of education. The drawback to it, however, was that collaboration was bounded by time and space. If you were not in very close proximity to somebody, you couldn't collaborate with them. The first thing to come along to change that, aside from the mail, was probably the telephone. But even at that, collaboration was very difficult. And then along comes technology that enables us, through what we're doing now, Google Hangouts, or social media applications like Twitter or LinkedIn, we're able to collaborate with anybody at any time without any regard to boundaries or time. So that's moved collaboration from something that was very limited to something that is boundless at this point. And in so doing, it enables us to be in touch with people who are like-minded, people who have the same interests that we do, people who challenge our interests. So we can connect with many, many people to expand our own experiences and to help create things that we need to create for our profession as well as our own personal growth. So that's what this whole connected idea is. It's being able to make collegial connections and connect with people who will advance us in our profession, advance us in our learning, and we in turn have a moral obligation to advance other people in our sharing and collaboration. So the connected educator is a collaborative educator who's a lifelong learner, something that we talk about all the time and we give lip service to, but unfortunately not enough people live it. It's really a mindset, and it requires action. You can't say that you're a lifelong learner if you're not continuing to learn. And we're seeing too much of that, especially in this profession of education. Too many people get their degrees and get their license to teach and then get a job, and then they stop learning. It doesn't work that way. You've got a responsibility to continue learning because you've got a responsibility to the people that you are teaching. We have to keep in mind that you're not teaching them for where we live now. We're teaching them for the world that they're going to live in. Certainly, when we look back at things that we've accomplished, I know I have a master's degree in educational technology, and I got that degree back in the 90s, and not one piece of software or one piece of hardware that I used to get that degree is even in existence today. So for me to be relevant in an area that I have a master's degree in, I have to be in contact with people who will continually help me learn. And that's where this whole connected idea comes in. A development of what we refer to as a professional learning network or personal learning network might be better. It enables us to direct our own learning so that I have an understanding of what it is I need to know for whatever reason I need to know it, and it gives me the ability to reach out to people who have a better knowledge of that to help me learn what it is I need to learn. The other thing that we have to keep in mind is that many of us, probably all of us, don't know what it is that we don't know. And unless we're exposed to people who know other things, we're never going to learn those things that we don't know. So that's all connected education.
Yeah, I mean, it baffles me sometimes that I'm not in public ed anymore. I left my role as director of instructional technology and moved to the private sector and moved into consulting. But it always baffled me that I could walk into a school and have this discussion about connected educators or have this discussion about using social media with students and teachers would say, but why? I mean, we're doing just fine with the ways that we've been doing things, and why we even continue to have these discussions about should we be using technology or should we be using these things. It's not there isn't any should be's anymore. You and I were on a call the other day where The analogy you gave was so eloquent, where you show people a picture of an operating room from 200 years ago, and say, would you like to get operated in this space, or would you rather get operated in this one? And you show them a picture of a modern one, and then you show a picture of an old classroom versus a modern one, and there's relatively no difference. And so it's mind-boggling to me that you wouldn't want to put yourself into a space where there's really, really intelligent people having meaningful conversations about our profession. And with as much as you know as well as much as I do that our profession is under attack every day, and so why wouldn't you want to be in the space where you can change those minds and you can learn those tools and techniques and tips and to be a better teacher? Why wouldn't you want to be there? And so I think that's why we wrote it, was that it's not as hard as people think it is. It's not just Twitter. Twitter. You look through our book and it's Twitter is one small piece of it. There's a lot of other ways in order to do it, right? That we lay out, but the point is that you've got to do it.
Unfortunately, I got into a very lengthy discussion in a recent ed camp I was at this past weekend in Long Island. One of the problems that we have, I think, at least I think, this is my opinion only, we're all products, if not victims, of a 19th and 20th century education. Most educators today and most parents today are people who have gone through education using the model of both 19th and 20th century education. And now that we're in the 21st century, and we've been there for 14 years, so that's like a decade and a half almost, we're changing that model. We found out that lecture and direct instruction are not the best ways to effectively get kids to learn. What's more effective is collaboration. And our system, our 19th and 20th century system, is set up so that we put kids in rows facing the front of the room where the content expert stands and delivers content to all of those kids using the direct instruction or the lecture model. Knowing that that's no longer effective, we have to change that whole look. But the problem is, everybody that teaches and everybody who learned under the system knows that old system. So to break away from that and change your mindset into more collaborative learning spaces, to say, kids have to start working together. They need to build up their own personal learning networks. We know through research that homework is not what people thought it was through the 1800s and 1900s, and it's research tells us that homework has very little effect on learning. So you start adding all of these things together, and the model that we have for a teacher begins to change. Technology will never replace a teacher. However, what it will do is change the job of the teacher. It's going to change the model of the teacher. If I, as a teacher and the content expert, stand in the front of the room, if I take all the knowledge that I have in my head about whatever subject I'm teaching, and I'm able to pour that knowledge into the heads of every one of my students, I'm limiting them, because they can get more access to more information if they understand how to use technology and the internet to acquire that information. So rather than teach them what to learn, we as teachers have to begin to teach them how to learn, how to critically think, how to curate information, how to discern what information is valid and what is not valid, how to create with that information once they have it, after they analyze it. These are the things that we as educators should be educating kids to do, because once again, as technology moves at the rate that it's moving, it's going to change things. So the way we learn and the tools that we're using today are not going to be the same tools that we're using 10 years from now. So teaching kids how to learn and how to be flexible in their learning is the best preparation we can give them for the lives that they're going to lead. We don't know what jobs they're going to have because most of those jobs are not yet created. You and I are doing things right now that were not possible 4 years ago. There were no social media consultants because there was no social media. It just started like 6 or 7 years ago. So now we've created an industry that has to be supported by people who know what they're doing there. And it has nothing to do with standardized testing, which, I hate to get into that, but that again is an industry. The whole standardized testing thing is an industry that is making $1 billion a year for standardized testing and everything around it. So it's going to be very difficult to tell people, well, we have to get rid of standardized testing because it doesn't work, because it's making somebody $1 billion a year. So we may have to live with that for a while.
Well, and I think your relation to jobs is important, because if you think about 100 years ago, the jobs that people were doing, it was people didn't need a whole lot of skills in order to go into a factory. What people wanted, what factory leaders wanted, was people who could follow directions and could just repetitively do tasks over and over. Or the same thing with the farmer. I mean, they didn't need people who could think. They needed people who could follow directions, and so that's how school was set up, was to teach you some basic skills so that you could manage your money and manage your home and have kids, but pretty much so that you could follow directions. And now, just like you said, the job, I have a 1-year-old. The job that my 1-year-old is going to have when she graduates from college, who knows? Who knows what the possibilities are there? Are going to be there, but the fact is that she's going to have to be able to think and going to have to be able to collaborate and be able to utilize. It's not anything unusual for you and I. Hey, we need to jump on a call. Oh, well, let's start a Google Hangout. I mean, it's instant. We have this instant mode of communication, that the way that business is done. Even in my work, I'm on calls all day long. I'm on my computer. I'm hanging out. I'm sending documents. I'm doing all kinds of things that 10 years ago and never would have conceived of being able to do. But yet there's still this argument that in education, for whatever reason, is that teachers don't need to be utilizing these tools. They don't need to be connected. A lot of the things we touch on in the book, they don't need, there's this conception that, I don't need to be on Twitter because I don't need to connect. I don't need to be in LinkedIn. I don't need to be using social networking. I don't need to be doing those things because I'm just fine in my profession. And the fact is, the title is true, that if you don't do those, you will not be relevant. You're quickly becoming an irrelevant educator and doing a disservice to kids. So what we want to do is present that information in an easy and digestible way. I mean, that's what I love about the series, is that these books are, the whole series is under 80 pages, and so the fact is you can read this book in a weekend and have a wealth of knowledge. I mean, the resources that are in it are tremendous, that you and I pulled together of being able to show people how to do these things. That it's why wouldn't you take the time to at least learn about it and educate yourself about it a little bit?
Well, I also think the whole term technology should be taken out of the discussion of education. I mean, we should talk about learning, we should talk about education, but when we talk about learning, once again, in the modern setting, I hate to say the 21st century, in the modern setting, if you're going to get a job, there are certain things that you'll probably be required to do in the job. You're going to have to know how to curate information. You're going to have to know how to collaborate with people. You're going to have to know how to communicate with people, and you're going to have to know how to create things. But the tools for doing all of this happen to be tools of technology. And how can we, as educators, say that we're preparing kids for their future, for the ability to thrive in their culture, when in fact we're not preparing them with the tools they need to do the very things that we're supposed to be teaching them? So none of that makes sense to me unless technology somehow is involved. So let's teach collaboration, and let's talk about collaboration, but in order to collaborate, aside from sitting across from each other, you're going to have to know how to do a Google Hangout. You're going to have to know social media applications like Twitter and LinkedIn. You're going to have to know about Skype. You're going to have to know about other social media platforms that can be used. You're going to have to know how to write a letter. You're going to have to know how to use the telephone. But these are all things that go into giving us the skill of collaboration. So let's not talk about technology. Let's just talk about collaboration.
Well, and it's not just with use with kids either, too. It's the PD aspect of it too. I mean, why would you let? And I think I can say this because I used to do PD for a district, but don't just leave your professional development in the hands of the people who you're employed by. Take ownership of your PD and learn what's meaningful to you in your classroom. Take my wife for example. She teaches in a district that has 4,000 teachers. There are easily 300 to 400 math teachers just like her who are struggling with Common Core, wondering how to integrate or wondering how to do these things, and there's just not enough people or personnel in the district in order to provide her the PD at the time that she needs it. So instead, you can turn to something like social media, you can turn to webinars through EdWeb, or you can turn to all these other places that provide you this professional learning when you need it, at the moment that you need it. So why wouldn't you do that? I guess to me it's like you say all the time, the worst advocates for connected educators are connected educators, because to what it makes sense. I mean, it's just something. It's a philosophy that we both bought into very, very long ago, and trying to convince people of doing it differently who don't think that way is a challenge. Why wouldn't you do this?
Yeah, another thing, the big white elephant in the room, as it were, is the fact that PD in our profession, in the education profession, doesn't work. It hasn't worked for years. That whole model of PD it just doesn't make sense. You can't take a room full of people that contain math teachers, social studies teachers, English teachers, and science teachers, and say, okay, now we're going to teach you all the bells and whistles of this product so that you'll be able to go back and teach your kids. First of all, everybody looks at that product differently. They've all got different needs for it. The best way to work PD would be to get a teacher and say, what is it you do with your classes? What are your goals? What are you accomplishing? Once you understand that, you can say, all right, here are ways that you might be able to use tools of technology, tools of learning, to more efficiently and effectively do that same thing. So that would be the way to deliver PD. It's not done that way. And the whole idea of being connected in directing your own learning, you as an English teacher or you as a math teacher or a science teacher know what it is you teach, and you know what direction you would like to go in. If you can contact people and be in constant contact with people who are doing similar things, you can exchange ideas how to better do the very same things that everybody's doing in your own field. And that is a much more meaningful way to learn things than to put everybody in the cafeteria for a group lesson on some piece of software that nobody's ever going to use again. Because aside from teaching them the software, nobody provides time for collaboration or support to do any of that stuff, which is why PD is failing.
Well, I think, and again, completely 100% biased. I think a lot of the things that are the takeaways in the book, people will, those who maybe already are connected, hopefully will learn something new, and those who aren't, hopefully they'll give it to somebody who isn't, and hopefully they'll learn something new. So we've got just a couple minutes left. I always like to wrap up these innovations and conversations. So I've talked with Aaron Klein, I've talked with Amanda Dykes, and they gave some pretty cool answers. So I like to ask, you've been in education a long time. My best piece of advice comes from you. So what is the best piece of advice you ever got as a teacher that you would give to somebody else?
Best piece of advice. In preparation for an observation, they're going to come in and observe you. The day before that happens, tell all of your students, tomorrow, whatever question I ask you, I want you to raise your hand. Raise your right hand if you know the answer. Raise your left hand if you don't, and I'll take care of the rest.
Well, I love it.
What I would tell anybody, and I would tell my students this, when it comes to observations, the best thing to do is to control the situation. You should be knowing when you're coming up with a good lesson, a lesson that you think is going to work. Invite your principal in. The more your principal see, and the more often you do it, the better off it is. The more they see what you can accomplish and what you are accomplishing when it's under your control to do so with these great lessons, the more times you have them in. If they happen to come in on an off day, they'll recognize that as an off day. So frequently invite administrators into your classroom for those lessons that you're really confident in teaching. They like to get invited in. They'll come, if you invite them in, and it really makes their job easier.
Well, I think, speaking from experience as somebody who did that, principals love to be rather than coming in just because they have to, I think a lot of them would love to come in because they're invited in and would love to have that time, especially not only with you as a teacher, but with the kids as well. So that's a great piece of advice. So thank you for that, Tom. Thank you, Tom. This is, as always, it's always a treat and a pleasure to talk to you. Again, here's the book, The Relevant Educator. You can buy that at Corwin.com, and so thank you to Tom, and thank you to Promethean and ClassFlow. You can check out all the Innovations and Conversations videos on the My ClassFlow YouTube channel, and you can follow me on Twitter at Web20Classroom. You can follow Tom on Twitter at Tom Whitby, and we'll have a post up shortly when the video is uploaded to YouTube. Don't forget to join us for our next Innovations and Conversations on October the 10th at 5 p.m. Eastern, where I'll talk to Kyle Pace. So Kyle is a good friend of mine. We'll talk everything Google Classroom, everything that Kyle's doing, some cool things that he's got going on, and so I hope you can join us October the 10th at 5 p.m. This is Steven Anderson for Innovations and Conversations, and we'll see you next time.